And our last, but very much not least speaker is Nathan Phelps. He is the Regulatory Director for Education and Innovation at Vote Solar. Prior to that, he was a senior economist at the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities with a primary focus on renewable energy and distributed generation. At Vote Solar, Nathan's work focuses primarily on two issues. First, developing and presenting easily understandable ways to discuss the issues confronting the electricity sector. And two, working on creative ways to improve the electricity sector. All of Nathan's work is centered around the idea that the electricity sector needs to be clean, renewable, and integrate justice in order to be equitable for everyone. So with that, I will turn you over to Nathan, and I'll just say that we're going over a little bit, but as the speakers are able to stay on a little longer, we can extend the question and answer period past the 12:30 mark, if everybody's agreeable. So, Nathan?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to Pace for having me here today. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to cover a lot of the same concepts or the same ideas that both Carl and Caitlin covered. So I'm not going to use any slides or anything. I'm just going to try to talk through some of these issues. If there's one key thing I want everyone to take away from this webinar, it is that DER, distributed energy resources, can save ratepayers, can save customers money. Like, that's the one key takeaway I would like everyone to gather from this webinar. When we think about just energy resources in general, really there are two immensely important variables: time and location. It's really important where facilities are located, and it's important when they generate or when they produce electricity, depending on the technology. So when Connecticut decarbonizes, we can't just think about RECs, or the renewable energy certificates, or the environmental attributes. We really need to think more holistically about everything. We need to think about the availability of the resources and the location of the resources. Far too many states have focused just on RECs, and that includes Connecticut. Not just Connecticut, but it does include Connecticut. And there's a real disservice to Connecticut to focusing on just large renewables, especially when they're out of state. We need both large and distributed resources. Although larger generation may be cheaper installed costs, and Carl really hit upon this, that doesn't mean that it is located where customers will be using the electricity. Once again, especially if it's out of state. DER that are located where they provide the most locational benefits, they're located on the distribution system in Connecticut. And so DER in Connecticut can provide a lot of benefits that go beyond just the price to generate a kilowatt hour of electricity. Both Carl and Caitlin hit upon equity. I just want to take a step back, the 30,000-foot view if you want. But one of the arguments against decarbonization, or really change in general, are the financial impacts on low wealth families and disadvantaged communities. These are the customers that have the highest energy burden. And we should be worried about these customers. These are the most vulnerable customers, and they need additional support. But that does not mean that's a reason for inaction. They should not be an excuse for delaying the green energy economy. We collectively, we really need to make sure that they are part of the green energy economy going forward, that we do not leave them behind. This needs to be the focus of equity in energy. For those that are worried about the impacts of the green energy economy on the most vulnerable citizens, and are worried that the green energy economy will be inequitable, I have really two responses. First, we need to make sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, and that we have to ensure an equitable energy system going forward. And two, there is always an implicit assumption in the arguments against change that the current energy system is equitable, and that could not be further from the truth. We have never, ever had an equitable energy system. There has always been an unequal burden placed on customers, and the people that bear the most in regard to the non-financial impacts of the energy system, the environmental justice neighborhoods, they have been paying the price of that pollution in the form of their health or poor health. So before I think a little bit more about the future, or talk a little bit more about the future in Connecticut, I want to actually look at the past. In order to do that, I'm going to provide an analogy from Massachusetts. So in 2007, I was at the Renewable Energy Trust in Massachusetts. And in April of 2007, Governor Patrick announced a goal of 250 megawatts of solar by 2017. At that time, at the Renewable Energy Trust, we didn't know how we were going to do that. That seemed like such a large number. At the time, we only had a few megawatts. It seemed crazy that the governor of Massachusetts would put out this goal of 250 megawatts by 2017. Context, right? How times change. Well, needless to say, after we actually started to change some policies in Massachusetts, just a few years later, Massachusetts met that goal. And by 2017, that target date for that original goal, there was almost 10 times what the original goal was that was currently installed. The reason I'm providing this analogy is that what we do now when we set a goal in, say, in Connecticut right now, it can seem really, really large and really difficult to achieve that. But in hindsight, it can almost be comically small. So when we think about the 580 megawatts of storage by 2030 in Connecticut, we'll look back in the future. We'll look back at this time and say, that was a good start, but our aspirations were actually too modest. We'll look back on the caps of commercial solar and chuckle about how misguided our attempts to protect ratepayers were. We'll realize that limiting DER was actually costing ratepayers money, not protecting ratepayers. And especially as we think about electrification and the changing energy system, our perception needs to change. Hopefully, wisdom can help change our perception about what is actually best for everyone. So once again, I want to circle back to that key point. DER can actually save customers money. And to expand upon that a little bit, if we change our perception, customers can actually start to be a resource for a lower cost, cleaner, and more equitable energy system going forward. We have to think about customers more dynamically than we currently do. Customers can be part of the solution, if you will, rather than part of the problem that just needs to be served. So with that, I think we can turn it over to questions.
Great. We're getting a lot of good questions, and actually some of them have been answered in the chat, but I think it's good to bring them forward. I think Sabina started off a chain of questions that talked about, can utilities handle this future that we're all painting? Can they really handle a massively expanded amount of DERs? And as part of that, a participant from, I think, New York talked about the long list of interconnection, the delays and interconnections. And I know, Carl, you took a shot at answering those. Maybe you could sort of replicate some of that chat conversation verbally.
Yep. So, well, I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else I need to say. I do want to direct you, I guess, to the response. And Actually, tell you what, let me just pause. I threw a lot of words out here. Let's see what the other speakers have to say about that and give them a chance to talk a little bit too.
So Carl, this is Kate. Oh, Jason, do you want to go?
No, go ahead, Caitlin. I'll chime in
Yeah.
after.
So I think, first of all, it's a great question. And frankly, it's going to be like interconnection is one of the largest issues we're tackling right now. And when we talk about policy changes, they're involved in, what we're advocating for in terms of changing how we plan out for the grid. Something that a lot of state governments are recognizing right now is that we also are likely going to have to change how projects apply for interconnection and how interconnection is paid for. The Massachusetts Department of Energy, the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities is currently, they're in a pretty involved docket to look at how the costs for interconnecting these projects and the costs for paying for the upgrades to the distribution system to accommodate both the growth of distributed resources and broad electrification. They're considering how that might be changed. And as I mentioned in New York, obviously Governor Hochul established the new 10 gigawatt target, and the New York Energy Office, NYSERDA, and the Department of Public Service jointly put out a roadmap to get there. And actually comments are due today by all stakeholders. So it's going to be fascinating to see what other stakeholders have to say. But in the roadmap, one of the things that they highlighted was that, New York has also started the process of adjusting how interconnection upgrade costs and how transforming the grid is, and investments into the grid are paid for. But they also recognize that they're likely going to have to continue that conversation because it is a critical component to reaching these larger goals. So Nathan, feel free to add whatever you'd like to that. I'm sure you have many thoughts.
Thanks, Caitlin. So one thing I would say is it's entirely likely, I would actually say it really needs to be, but the utility of the future will likely look much different than the utility that we have currently, or utilities that we have currently. So right now, when a lot of utilities look at how they're going to serve the needs of customers, it's really infrastructure based. What's the substation we'll need? What are the new lines? What are the new capacitor banks? All of the infrastructure, what do they need? What do the utilities need to serve customers? And likely in the future, if we start to go towards a more complete holistic view of the energy system, it's going to require a lot more operational sophistication of the utilities. Utilities will have to have much better understanding of the resources that customers use and the resources that customers can provide to the grid overall. And so that will require a lot more communication between the utility and customers. And that will be a really big change. The operational requirements of the utility will get much more complicated. That does likely mean we will need new investments. I want to be clear, it doesn't mean no new investments in the energy system. We will need investments, but there will also be a lot of operational requirements that need to change.
Speaking of utilities, I wonder whether all of you could address what are the implications for utilities and their revenues and their profits in going to a more distributed energy resource rich grid?
How much time do we have here?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Look, for the last 100 or so years, we've had a utility system that rewards utilities for spending more money, and they've gotten so good at spending more money that, well, they've spent more than they need in many cases. And the what we call CapEx bias, the bias towards capital investment distorts everything. We do need capital investment still. We need a smarter, more modern distribution grid. We need better targeted transmission. We need investment in clean energy generation, utility, and distributed scale. But what we don't need is growth for growth's sake, which is, the ideology of cancer. What we need is growth for performance. So a lot of states are looking at performance-based regulation that will allow utilities to earn more for doing a better job of meeting our policy objectives, like a clean energy mix that serves people with more justice, and that gets rid of fossil combustion consequences. So what does that frankly mean? Well, it means maybe the rate base, the capital spending of utilities could go down, because we're going to energize markets for distributed resources, and a lot of people will get into the game and will use our energy much more efficiently. But the profits for utility shareholders could go up if they meet criteria that policymakers and regulators set along the lines of justice and decarbonization and access and market growth in distributed energy resources, as well as the other resources. So that's my take.
And just one key point I'd add on to what Carl is saying there is that could actually mean reduced cost to ratepayers. So performance-based regulation doesn't mean customers pay more. That's not what it means. It means we change the way in which utilities make money. And I can't help but note, Connecticut Pure has a docket open on performance-based regulation. The process for that actually starts next week. So if anyone wants to learn more about that or get involved, feel free to reach out to me and I'll provide you some resources.
Bernie, do you have more questions from people?
Oh, what I thought we could do, Peter, is just sort of open it up. If people want to raise their hands, they can. It's hard to summarize some of these because they're very unique. So I figure we should just open it up if you want to raise your hands. And it looks like Charlie W. has raised his hand.
Yeah. When you're talking about DER providing a lower cost grid overall, does that assume that there's some subsidy of DER or no subsidy of DER?
Well, what it means is, well, first of all, and I made a comment about this in one place, there's a whole lot of execution issues that come after you've created the roadmap, right? This is like, you plan your big vacation, you say you're going to go across the country, go visit the relatives, whatever you're going to do. And then you get on the road and, the kids have to stop more often than you thought, or you decide to take a side trip for a tourist destination, or you decide to stick on the highways and get there as fast as you can, whatever it is, right? The actual execution of the roadmap is human, it has humans involved, and it could go all over the place. What this modeling tells you, very simply, if it tells you could save $100 billion by by taking advantage of your distributed resources, you could apply all that $100 million to your distributed resources to make sure you get there. We ran a scenario off of the first model in which we took roughly 100 million of the almost 500 million, and we applied it just to distributed resources to sort of help them out with a, if you will, subsidy. And what it did is it grew distributed resources by a much even bigger amount, because it turns out that distributed solar and utility solar are getting closer in cost. And so the leverage power of applying money to that resource grows with every year, and you can really make a big difference. That's why I made the point that you will have savings to deploy in a way that you want to. We didn't assume subsidies in this model. We assumed that the resource chosen is the least cost resource, and we used our best estimates as to what those were. We could quibble about whether you agree, whether our number we use, if we use the conservative NREL number or the advanced NREL number for the future price of solar. That's all modeling. You could, like I say, you could buy insurance against it, or you can quibble with the assumptions. Different things will happen. What I would do is, though, if you do need a subsidy because of things you can't count on, then I'd start pursuing the roadmap that has the maximum opportunity for savings, because that's your insurance policy against the stuff you don't know.
One thing I'd add to that is just when we think about subsidies, I think we, in general, should think a little bit more broadly about subsidies. So for instance, the International Monetary Fund last year did a report looking at the subsidies that went to the fossil fuel industry in the year 2020. So just 1 year, and they came up with a number of $5.9 trillion. And so we need to think about subsidies, like, what do you mean by that? So does that actually take into account the subsidies that that fossil fuel industry does not have to pay for the environmental harm that they do? As an example, subsidies can go a lot of different directions. I suspect what you meant was additional financial incentives for people to adopt DER, and that may be necessary.
Why don't we go to John Hall and then to Mark Scully?
This question is for Carl, and just a clarification. I'm trying to always think about how to simplify this for the general public. I took this from your presentation. I just want to check it out. Is it the fact that the major unaddressed benefit of distributed generation or distributed energy resources is that you avoid the payments to these power plants just to be ready to run, and often they are not running at all? Am I getting that right?
Yes. That is a huge and near-term, mostly near-term, but well, over the long-term benefit. Our future is about, if we go down the path of renewable energy like we say we're going to, our future is about abundant availability of energy from power plants at no incremental cost to make it, right? I mean, there's what we say in the utility business is the marginal cost of generation from solar and wind is zero because they don't have a fuel. So the most important cost, the cost that the market will clear on, as we say, is the cost of taking abundant, inexpensive energy and getting it to, as Nathan said, load at the right place and the right time. That's an issue of peaking right now. And right now we do it with power plants that are remotely located, that have to use the same transmission lines and then operate only 80 or a couple hundred hours a year. When a battery could be put there and give us benefits, not only those 80 or 100 hours, but additional hours as well. So near term, avoid the pollution and the cost of poorly utilized peaker plant assets by using an asset that you can run more often to get savings out of the peak and across that 80% of hours in that diagram. Get a resource use a tool that has more uses instead of this extremely specialized, expensive tool that can only be used for one very specific purpose. And use better tools to firm up that energy. What this model enables us to do is not just figure out what does it cost where you make it, but what does it cost to ship it, get it to the place you need to, and get it there at the right time. And when you calculate that question, which is the question we really need answered, you just go running for the distributed energy resources.
Thank you. That helps a lot. That's a great answer.
I think I'm up next. I don't think Jonathan Steinberg is the only one who gets excited after a presentation like this. I know I am. And this group, the Connecticut Energy Network, is notorious for leading events like this and doing this stuff at home. So I don't know if Carl, Caitlin, or Nathan, you're able to comment on any activities for possibly doing a modeling exercise for New England, or is there anything that PACE or anyone on this call could do to help make that happen?
You know, we're lucky we have somebody on the call who's actually been putting together a lot of these exercises that I got to talk about. Rob, do you want to unmute and give a little idea of what it takes to get involved with the local Solar for All Coalition? Are you there? There he is.
Yeah. So, you know, most of the work that we've been doing with local solar, hi, everybody. I have been kind of playing utility fielder with local Solar for All for about a year now, and you know, spent several decades promoting clean energy, much of it in New England. The local Solar for All has primarily been focused over the past year on getting these model results out as a means of sort of changing the mindset of the key people whose minds we need to change in order to begin to scrutinize our utility planning and to recognize the value of DER. There's a mindset change that needs to happen. As we all know, because we've been doing this, and Connecticut knows it, it's always been kind of confounding to me how little Connecticut is and how much it would benefit from distributed resources, since it doesn't have a whole lot of domestic utility scale options. So that's what we've been doing mostly, is more of a hearts and minds campaign, and then seeing where with programs like this we can help elevate the discussion. So we don't have a lot of capacity to put boots on the ground and drive things, but I think the biggest thing people can be doing is taking the information that you're getting here and sharing it with the people who have the power to do something about it. And I think that would include bending the ears of, state regulators and utilities and asking them why they aren't taking advantage of the tools available to do better planning that recognizes what we all know, that distributed generation is worth a lot more than what most of the usual suspects think.
That's really exciting. And I think hopefully some of those ears and minds are on this call, and maybe that process has already begun. I see one hand up, Peter from Greenwich, and then I'll turn it back to Mark and Peter.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I have a quick public service request. So everybody probably knows that the Connecticut legislature is in session right now, and there are quite a number of bills that relate to renewables and energy efficiency. I have not read all of those bills, and I wouldn't necessarily have an informed opinion on them anyway, but I do want to write a written commentary on them, as well as perhaps provide some public commentary and support for those. So if the hosts, the panelists, if anybody has specific talking points that they could share that I could incorporate on behalf of the Energy Management Advisory Committee for the town of Greenwich, I would really appreciate that.
Peter, thank you for that. We will be sending out in the next few days the video recordings of this, but also we had sent out there's more information. The podcast Volts, that's a V as in Victor, OLTS, did a really terrific summary of this study. And that may be a good source, a written source of points from the study and that you can incorporate into your comments. But get in touch with Mark or Bernie or me, and we'll be glad to give you with information also about SB 176 and what the Coalition for Sensible Solar Regulation has been up to.
Peter, I'll just add one other point. I got a chance to look at the provisions of one bill, the one that has caps, raises the caps. Yay, raise the caps. But why do we have caps anyway? And caps just screw up a market. The minute you start approaching the cap, the industry goes, oh, I don't know, my whole business could go away. They start acting weird, prices get weird. There's no scientific or technical basis for caps. You can see it coming. You can study whether or not you have a problem. The utilities are on top of this stuff. So that's one of them. Another one is the idea of whether you should be able to maximize the use of rooftops for solar for commercial, industrial customers, and I would say for residential homeowners as well. And the answer should be yes. This is a high fixed cost business. The most of the cost is in acquiring a customer, doing the planning, getting the permits. Once you're up there, adding a kilowatt is great for the system. It provides excess electricity during those peaking periods when you guys are starting to see summer loads go up high. So let's not be foolish and reduce the amount of the size of systems. Let's try to get the maximum amount and recognize that, just like the utility business is always saying, solar is a high fixed cost business. So get the most out of your fixed cost investments. And then finally, there's some talk about whether the utility should be able to get into the distributed solar market. We addressed this in New York. I am very worried about a monopoly and their ability or even inclination to take advantage of their market power in a young market. That sounds like a lot of trouble, and you got to have a lot of cops on the beat if you want to prevent bad behavior. That being said, the way we addressed this in New York with New York Rev was that if the market is not being served, the early stages, or we've tried everything and it's the late stages, a market that is just not being preserved by the competitive sector, well, then we have a utility in place, let them provide that. So, a classic example might be low income multifamily housing. It's really hard. They're focusing on so many things that maybe they have a hard time getting competitive solar providers to work with them. That's a great place for the utility to get involved, help them out a little bit, maybe deploy storage because it's good for the grid for reliability purposes. But as soon as that market gets going and everybody recognizes, hey, serving all customers is good, and the market takes over, then the monopoly shouldn't be allowed to dominate. And to me, that's a very logical way to do it. But I wouldn't, unleash the monopoly to compete head to head. That's the opposite of what we should be doing. When we regulate, we're supposed to use regulation as a substitute for competition. And as everyone knows, capitalism without competition is exploitation.
So it's 12:33. I want to respect everybody's time. If the speakers, if Carl and Caitlin and Nathan, if you have 10 more minutes, say, to take questions, let's think in terms of 10 more minutes, and then we'll go on our way.
Okay, well, why don't we go, and we got 4 hands raised. Roger, Headley, Don, and Jean, and maybe in that order. And we'll see if we can do it in 10 minutes.
Thanks very much. Wonderful topics. Thank you all for really a compelling thing. Specifically, this goes to the heart of what a few of you were talking about, and that's, legislating the laws that allow us to actually get this done. In Connecticut, since we have half-time lawmakers, which is a constitutional thing in the state and a problem, it's what we do in the out of session months that is really critical. And like movers and shakers, like Representative Steinberg and Representative Palm and people like that really want to get this stuff going and understand this, really need our help when the general session is out of session. So I hope we can, rally the forces and build on what PACE has been doing incredible stuff. I'm with Citizens Climate Lobby. We've been working on a variety of things as well. but we really need to meet with one-on-one and in small groups with those lawmakers in the Energy and Technology and Environmental Committee that are not as fluent on this subject. And that is what's holding us back on getting the laws through. So we need these foundational bills, and we need to remove the caps on solar and open the doors to distributed energy and microgrids. And we really need a moratorium on any new fossil fuel infrastructure. And one of the things we've been working on is a state, regional, and federal price on carbon that has a cash back to protect those least able to afford this transformation. Representative Steinberg, of course, is a leader in pricing carbon, exploring that for a number of years. Thank you very much, Representative. But we should not give up on that. So,
thank you, Roger. I think we better get on to actual questions.
I had one, but that's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
With everything that you said. Bernie?
Lee, I think you're next. You're on mute, and if you can unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I have actually two questions. I'll try and be quick. The first is, to what extent do these models take into account the broader environmental costs of producing and disposing of solar panels, batteries, etc.? And then the second is, can they be adapted to also take into account improved building codes or insulation that could reduce the need for energy and therefore reduce the total capacity required?
So on the first question, this is terrible. I don't know, because what we do is we use assumed costs or modeled costs of resources from things like NREL, the Energy Information Administration. NREL is the source of the modeling projections for the cost of solar. And I don't know if when they say it'll cost 4 cents per kilowatt hour in the year 2032 or something, whether that includes the fully internalized cost of disposal. So I just don't know. And we'll have to look at how those assumptions are made. If they don't, then you've got a classic externality, and you need to add in a value and then figure out how that changes the output of the model. So it's a good question. I just don't know. But I'll do some checking with Chris Clack and the folks there. The second question is how does the model deal with building codes and insulation, or does it? And that is making the space more energy efficient. Building codes, stretch codes, all these things are great ways to reduce demand. They can be permanent. They can be beneficial, obviously. The model does allow consideration of dynamically of chunks of demand side management resources, but the capacity value of those resources is not, they are not selected often as capacity resources, because what we're doing is we're doing the utility system modeling. What does the utility system need? And generally speaking, they choose these generation or storage resources. So there's still work to be done on the demand side. The really best place to get after that and other demand resources like demand response and other resources is with distribution level planning or integrated distribution planning, IDP, which is a complement to this kind of model. The wisdom model does not try to perform distribution modeling. So optimizing your distribution load with all those other resources that are available, what we need to do is figure out how to design that so that it plugs in to the utility scale modeling that the wisdom utility system modeling that the wisdom model is designed to do.
Excellent. Gene, I think you've got the last question.
Thank you, Bernie. First, a comment on something Carl mentioned. In Connecticut, we've been limiting the incentive payment that the Green Bank gives to homeowners who put solar on their house to what they consume in a year. So if you want to put more on than that, you're not going to incentivize that. And I've been arguing against that for years. We need all the solar we can possibly get. So many people can't do it on their roof. The Green Bank could own the additional capacity and through a virtual net metering accounting process, sell it to anybody else who wants to invest. So there would be no net cost to the Green Bank because they'd have investors financing that additional solar area on roofs. It's completely workable, and it's silly to send an installer out to do a partial roof installation. It looks terrible, and it wastes some of his time. He doesn't get the full possibility of what he could be doing on that house.
I love your suggestion of a very creative solution in which you share. When I was at Austin Energy, we wanted to try to get solar onto this bicycle repair facility in the community, and what we did is we allowed the tenant to sort of pay us with the share of the solar. So community solar, shared solar, knows how to allocate solar output to multiple customers or to multiple subscribers. And we should be using this kind of creative thinking to maximize the value of every dollar we invest in solar and storage. And that's exactly a great way to do it. So I'm just saying kudos.
And just a question then, has the Connecticut grid been modeled with this new software? No. And who would do that?
No, it hasn't. And the way it would be done is if, a coalition of interested parties, the way we've done it in other places, a coalition of interested parties gets together, they agree on what scenarios they want to model, and then they contract with the local Solar for All coalition, with Vibrant Clean Energy, or by themselves even, because Vibrant Clean Energy is a separate business. They do work with people all the time. My recommendation is that you do it as New England, even though you can get the resolution down to you can see what's going on in Connecticut. And that's because the bigger the system you model, the more opportunity for savings. Because you could take advantage of resources in other places and really maximize the use of your investments in transmission and distribution infrastructure. Whenever you draw the circle too small, you end up with your bordering assumptions dominating your results. You want to give yourself the opportunity to, for a more liquid, if you will, market environment. So I would suggest need pool at the very start, the New England, power pool, to do this at, but you could also do it Connecticut only.
Great. Well, I think at this point at 12:45 almost, this is the time to end it. I want to thank all our presenters, Carl Robigo of Local Solar for All, and Caitlin Kelly O'Neill of the Coalition for Community Solar Access, and Nathan Phelps of Vote Solar. Patrice Gillespie for helping us, and the whole team at PACE, Mark Scully, President, and Bernie Pelletier, Vice President, and Deborah, Program Manager. And I would just echo something that somebody else said, which is we can't just leave this here. We are all in districts, almost all of us are in districts in Connecticut. We need to become a little more fluent in talking about this. You don't have to be an expert, but I think you have to take the videos that we're going to be sending and try and put them in front of your legislators. Try to put them in front of any other policymakers who you're aware of. This has to, the point of all this is to change the narrative here in Connecticut. And for that, we need many people to do that. So again, thank you to everyone, and we look forward to talking more another time.